All right, well, welcome everyone, and thank you all for coming to Politics in the Pub tonight. I'm Bill Browne, Director of Democracy and Accountability at the Australia Institute. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement and to pay respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and pay respect to their elders past and present. And I extend this respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be attending today's event. The Australia Institute is proud to be one of the country's most influential and trusted public policy think tanks. We're producing high-impact research that matters. Our greatest strength is our independence, and only you can make that possible. And The Point is our media partner for Politics in the Pub. The Point is a new initiative of the Australia Institute, a media website that brings you research, explainers, and fact checks from leading experts in their fields. And we're doing live blogs during Parliament City Weeks. So you can follow along with the day's happenings live by heading to the Point website. We'll be up tomorrow, for example. And if you'd like to support us tonight, please speak to Hannah at the back. We have tap and go donations available, which are also tax deductible. And you should all have on your seats some more information here. So with that out of the way, I'd like to welcome our guests for this evening. Dr Sophie Scamps, MP, Independent Federal Member for Mackellar. Before being elected in 2022, Dr Scamps worked as an emergency doctor at Mona Vale Hospital and as a local GP. She founded Our Blue Dot, a community-led non-profit organisation that aimed to reduce waste and emissions. In 2025, Dr Scamps was re-elected on a platform of addressing intergenerational inequality, tackling the cost of living and climate crises, as well as supporting small businesses and better health outcomes. She contributed to Australia Institute Press's A Time for Bravery, What Happens When Australia Chooses Courage. We've got copies of A Time for Bravery available at the back of the room after tonight's event, and Sophie will be around for book signing. We also have with us Dr Richard Dennis, Co-Chief Executive Officer at the Australia Institute, prominent Australian economist, author, and public policy commentator. He spent the last 20 years moving between policy-focused roles in academia, federal politics, and think tanks. So we're here to talk about the jobs for mates culture in Australia. Sophie, at the outset, what is your Ending Jobs for Mates bill? Where did the idea come from? How does the bill seek to address the problem? And what do you have planned for the bill itself?
Thanks, Bill. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here tonight, because we love bringing people back into their democracy. You guys keep it real. So thank you for being here. The Ending Jobs for Mates bill is really about bringing greater transparency and independence into the appointments process, particularly for those major public roles. So why did it come about? Well, it came about, I think everyone remembers what had happened to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal that had to be abolished, that was so heavily stacked with political friendly appointments that it really compromised the function of that body. And that's one of the absolute core pillars that underpin our democracy. So it ended up being abolished.
Same thing
as well. But under Scott Morrison, I think 40% of the appointments to the plum positions were found to be politically friendly appointments. So that really undermined both the competency and I think the effectiveness of that really important body. So the Labor Party did abolish that. And then the other thing is, leading up to the 22 election, there were two other issues that stuck in my mind. Was we had bodies such as the Climate Change Authority and then the COVID Coordination Recovery Commission. both the people that were appointed to head up those really important bodies were former fossil fuel executives. And so when it came to that COVID coordination commission, you'd think that that was kind of a public health, primarily about public health. But what we got out of that, of course, was the gas-led recovery. So it just goes to show that the appointments are incredibly important for dictating the culture and the direction of really important bodies that do underpin our democracy. So we need to make sure that they're transparent and that it's done independently. So the Ending Jobs for Mates Bill is really about bringing independence and transparency back to the appointments process. And it has things like it has a public appointments commissioner, a joint committee that oversees all of those type of things. But the absolute core of it is these departmental independent selection panels. And all the way through there's transparency all the way through it. So there needs to be specified selection criteria. They need to be advertised for at least 2 weeks in 3 places so that people do actually have the opportunity to apply for these roles. Then the independent selection panel runs a competitive process and then shortlists 3 candidates. And it's only from that shortlist that the minister can choose from. So there is still an element of ministerial discretion, but not complete ministerial discretion. And it really is to make sure that these bodies are working in the best interests of Australians, but also it's not just giving plum rolls to, the mates of, for rewards for loyalty to political parties as well. So that's it in a nutshell, and that's kind of why it came about. And then, of course, I reintroduced it because the government did suggest that they'd be working hard on this issue, but haven't, as we saw with the Bridge Review, which I'm sure will come up.
I'm glad you mentioned the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, because there was Australia Institute research that looked into the nature of political appointments to that body. And one of the striking things was that there was a change. We sometimes talk about politics as being tit for tat, both sides are the same. But under the Howard era, you're looking at about 4% political appointments, up to 40% under the Morrison government. So there was a distinct strategy at work there. And it benefited the government as well. It wasn't just helping out a mate for its own sake.
I'll just add to that. I had Andrew G, who is now the Independent, was a member of the Nationals Party. He seconded the bill for me just recently when I introduced it, because he was actually a cabinet minister in the Morrison government and saw it happen firsthand. So it was good to have him second the bill.
Now, we've talked about the AAT, clearly an example of jobs for mates, but in general, are we being too cynical, Richard?
Never. And let me just add one thing to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. It wasn't 4% under Howard, 40% under Morrison. One of the reasons for that was that the AAT became one of the few places people seeking asylum or otherwise appealing immigration decisions could go. So the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, pretty sexy name, right? Like everyone grew up wanting to be on the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. But what it actually became was not just a very well-paid job, but a very well-paid job overseeing some of the most consequential bureaucratic decisions that had very high political significance. So once upon a time, no one really cared about stacking the AAT. Like there's lots of places to get jobs for your mates, but the AAT became a really key place because those nasty refugees kept going there and being found to have not had due process, not had key facts considered. So it's not just the stacking; it was how the department and other decision-making bodies were evolving their decisions that we had to stack the oversight. We, as in was on your behalf, our elected representatives had to stack the oversight body to protect their bad decision making. I won't say all decisions are political these days, Bill, but gee, a lot of them are, and we know it. Jay Weatherill was just made High Commissioner to the UK. Quite like Jay, reckon he'll do an all right job. But what's that? $500,000 a year. Tax-free, very nice house in London. I don't know if you've ever been to Australia House, very tidy. We just take for granted, of course, you would just pluck someone out and give them that job. that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily a good thing, but I think as a democracy, we kind of have to grapple with this. And that's why I think Sophie's bill is so important, because in most democracies, there's a kind of trade-off between, yes, of course you elected President Trump. Who's President Trump going to make President Trump's, Secretary of State? Someone that he thinks is good. So in the US, they have a very overt kind of changing of the guard, but they also have things like Senate, confirmation hearings, right? Where the president's free to put someone up, and then the Senate basically goes through every embarrassing thing that person ever said and said, this is what you now own. All right, so you want to put someone up, you can put them up, but we're gonna highlight to everybody how bad we think your judgment is. So in the US, it's incredibly political, the appointment to those senior administrative and bureaucratic roles, but there's still scrutiny and oversight, and ultimately the voters get a say. And if you appoint an idiot and everyone thinks they're an idiot, it splashes back on you. But Australia's kind of uniquely bad, I would suggest. Don't laugh, we should fix that. Because we don't have a kind of process-oriented approach like Sophie's proposing, and we don't have a transparent, accountable political approach. We just kind of do it in secret and then don't even talk about it. And that's the worst of both worlds. And that's something I think we really have to grapple with, because the consequence of these decisions, like the AAT decisions, can be very important. But similarly, they strip away at trust. When people see it, people are supposed to approach you all the time and say, I hate it when I see them just giving their mates jobs. That's our democracy getting harmed by their dumb decision making.
And there's a verb to balk, which means to screw something up, which comes from an appointee who went through the confirmation process and messed it up so badly that it changed the English language. So it really works. It was, yeah.
It's in America, in case you missed it. But yeah, balk was it was a Republican appointment, a proposed appointment to the Supreme Court. Yeah.
Sophie, so you mentioned that this private members bill is a second attempt. You first introduced it back in 2023. At that point, you would have been fairly new to politics, about a year in the role. I'm wondering, what have you learned about politics and Parliament since then, and is that affecting your approach to this bill?
I'm not sure that it's affecting my approach, but I will say that it seemed like after the 22, on the lead up to the 22 election and afterwards, that the government did talk a lot about their commitment to transparency and that they would fix this broken system. And they did do that when it came to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal and recreating the Administrative Review Tribunal. But in actual fact, and this is just one part of the things that we've experienced over the last few years, when the Administrative Review Tribunal was being recreated because it had been so badly stacked, they actually didn't fix any of the flaws that led to it being stacked. They didn't introduce a legislated or mandated independent selection process. That was just going to be, you can if you want to, you may from time to time use that if you would like to. So in actual fact, it wasn't solving any problems. It just fixed the immediate problem, but wasn't going to fix any long-term problems. So that was an eye-opener. But we did manage, because it didn't pass the Senate, did manage to finally get that in and legislated. So this bill, although not legislated broadly, is actually in action within the Administrative Review Tribunal. So that was a big win. But we had to push it, really push it, and the Senate on the crossbench, they had to push it as well. But the big one was I introduced the Ending Jobs for Mates bill for the first time in February 2023. March 2023. Met with the Attorney General, and then soon after that meeting, there was suddenly this announcement that there would be a review into public board appointments that would be made public, as Senator Gallagher said. We will make that public in 6 months' time when it is handed to us, in line with our commitment to transparency. And I don't know if you know what happened, but
Spoiler alert.
We We fought so hard for that to be made public, and we could not get it made public. So there was almost a revolt in the Senate led by Dave Pocock. But we asked questions in question time, both in the House and in the Senate. We put in freedom of information applications. Dave was putting up order for the production of documents, and everything was knocked back. They just were not going to make this report public. It finally was made public after all this hoo-ha, because it was getting into the media and it was getting a bit ridiculous. It was finally made public just before Christmas, after Parliament had finished, on the same day that there were two other big announcements on AI and defence. So really, they didn't want anyone to notice. But that report was utterly damning, was so damning. And I've got a quote here, but basically was saying that our current appointments process is not fit for purpose. It reeks of nepotism and patronage, and should not be, and has no place in modern day Australian society. It couldn't be more damning. And saying this, there's a practice now of appointing friends to these political positions. It couldn't be more scathing. So it was obvious why that one was sat on for 2 years, and just like hoping everyone forgot about it. So that's why I had to reintroduce it. But and again, every time there's a new body created, we would put up the same amendment. Come on, have an independent process. But there's been a lot of new bodies that have been created, really important ones, including the Australian Centre for Disease Control, also the National Environment Protection Australia, the National Reconstruction Fund. None of them, not one of them, has an independent appointment process. It's all down to ministerial discretion. So we saw what happened in the US, as Richard was saying. The secretary for the Centre for Disease Control in the US is Robert F. Kennedy, who's an anti-vax, and so there's no criteria for him to have got that role. He doesn't have a background in health or anything like that. And he has the power, or the president has the power to sack the head of the CDC. I'm sorry, I got that a bit confused. He's secretary for the health. But they sacked the head of the CDC, who had been in the role for just 1 month, because she wasn't doing what she was told. She wasn't changing the whole vaccine protocol, and she wouldn't sack major researchers within that body. So she got the sack herself. And so that's what it is, to actually direct the way that this major institution is going within the US. It's one of the most powerful and highly regarded bodies, health bodies in the world, and now it is being captured because of the appointments process.
And when you talked about the kind of instinct to just rely on goodwill and kind of people doing the right thing, it reminded me of the ABC board appointment process, which has this detailed, fairly independent process for making an appointment, and the option for the minister to bypass that in consultation with the opposition, which does not require any kind of concession, just to tell them what's happening. And so you can set these things up, and Labor has mostly stuck to the independent appointment process for the ABC board, but then when the coalition is in power, they don't. So it makes sense to lock it in.
I was going to say also there's been a number of appointments, and to major bodies as well. So to the Net Zero Economy Authority, to the National Reconstruction Fund, to other bodies like that. So there's been people appointed to those, even to head up the review of the Food and Grocery Code of Conduct. These people are getting appointed. Now, the thing is, they may be absolutely the right person for the role, but what happens is when there's no independent or transparent process, the perception is that it's just jobs for mates. And so that corrodes people's trust in the political system, in the government, and in our democracy. And when you corrode that trust in our democracy, you then undermine social cohesion at the same time. And you have people moving to the fringes because they just do not trust the system.
Richard, this is a private members bill. I was wondering if you could take us through the role that private members bills play in our politics.
Yeah, sure. So a private members, well, let's go back a step. According to the Constitution, there's no such thing as a private members bill, right? It's just laws. Our Constitution's, quite clear about how we elect people to Parliament. It's our culture that comes up with things like prime ministers and cabinets and private members' bills and all sorts of things. So I guess the first place to start is a private member's bill is a proposal. It's a proposed law. It's a bill like any other bill before the parliament. But the way our parliamentary culture has evolved, it's nearly always the government of the day introducing proposed legislation, and then the parliament as a whole debating that, maybe sending it to committee and ultimately voting on it. But a private member's bill is literally just a proposed law coming from a non-government MP, a non-minister. But, you know, a Labor backbencher could introduce a private member's bill. They just get kicked out of the party if they did. But this is important. Like, we elect people to Parliament. Parliament makes laws. The laws that we make, there's nothing in the Constitution says all good ideas come from ministers. All good legislation is drafted by the department and the Parliamentary Drafting Office, and all other proposed laws are somehow, second order. That's not how democracies work in other countries. In the US, congressmen and women introduce legislation all the time. It's just entirely unnewsworthy that a member of Congress would propose a piece of legislation. So a private member's bill is a proposed law. They're less common in Australia because of our culture, not because of our constitution. But importantly, private members' bills can and have become law. Although Bill, who's far smarter than me, I hope you're going to remember, because I forgot and meant to Google it on the way here, Andrew Wilkie in the 2013 or 2010 Parliament had a private members bill that made it through both houses of Parliament, and it was related to freedom of speech or censorship or...
Well, he might have been the one who got a water trigger or a CSG trigger.
There was another one. Anyway, we'll look into it and let you know next week. But my point is, they do pass. They can pass. Other parliaments around the world do. In state parliaments, they're still uncommon, but not unheard of. Indeed, an issue close to my own heart, the Port of Newcastle in New South Wales was prevented from building a container terminal to compete with the container terminal at Sydney Port by a contract written by New South Wales Treasury. It was one of the more egregious anti-competitive privatisation provisions ever, and it was unwound by a private members bill that passed through both houses of Parliament. So private members bills are legally absolutely no different from any other law, but maybe Sophie would like to comment on this. It's our parliamentary process often makes it hard to make time to debate them, often makes it even harder to make time to vote on them. And that's to save the major parties the embarrassment of voting against good ideas.
Yeah.
Like, just to be clear, the easiest way in Parliament to ignore a hard question is to ignore the hard question. And if you don't get time to vote on it, you're off the hook. So, Sophie, they must have gone out of their way to help you debate and get votes on this.
Yes, no. A lot of people sort of say, right, what now? You've introduced a private members bill. What's going to happen now? And the really disappointing answer is, well, probably nothing when it comes to debating and getting it, all of that. But what it is it's a way, it's a strategy for us to bring in fresh ideas into Parliament and continue to socialise them. So we're really bringing an idea, debating it, but also getting it out in the media, making sure that people are aware of it. And this is what Helen Haynes did and the Greens did as well when it came to the National Anti-Corruption Commission. So you can start talking about it. What we want to happen is we want the people of Australia to start talking about these ideas, because in the end, the thing that pushes the government over the line to actually act on things is the people of Australia demanding it. So Helen had banged on, and Cathy Gowan before her and many others had talked about the National Anti-Corruption Commission. It happened eventually in 2022 because you just could not ignore it anymore, because the Australian people wanted it. And we now have a National Anti-Corruption Commission. Helen had a different bill. They didn't actually use Helen's bill. The government created their own new bill, which was basically exactly the same. But it happens, we need to socialise and bring awareness to these issues. And that's what we use the private members bills for. We really should have the opportunity to debate them. But again, debate is stifled, and we're always responding to the government's agenda rather than also bringing in, a proper debate on these fresh ideas.
And I think that's an important point that, while the statistics at the federal level for how many private members' bills pass are pretty low, if an idea is taking off, the government will make it its own, and they won't show up in the statistics as initiated by the crossbencher. Lest you think that Australians don't care about this issue, about 3 years ago, the Australia Institute did some polling testing whether people thought various edge cases qualified as corrupt conduct or not corrupt conduct. And right at the top of the list, 86% agreeing it was corrupt conduct, is appointing a friend or colleague to a public role over others who are more qualified. Then you've got things like signing a contract with an overseas company with a risk that money might be used corruptly, senior public servant misleading cabinet or the parliament. And then at 76% agree it's corrupt conduct, appointing a friend or colleague to a public role over others who are equally qualified. So people make a distinction there between choosing an unqualified person or a qualified one, but they still see the danger even if the person is perfectly qualified.
I was going to add to that because there's a distinction between criminally corrupt and this type of corrupt, which is doing something that is not in the public interest. And that's what we're talking about here.
And we have a very smart audience, Bill. I can now tell you, thanks to Leanne, my co-CEO, that the private members bill that became law in 2011 was the Evidence Amendment (Journalists' Privilege Act 2011. So what's interesting about that is that my recollection is the minister spoke against it on second reading and it became the law. So for the public servants in the room, get your head around that. It's the parliament, not the minister. It's the parliament that makes a law. And even if a minister doesn't like a law, or more importantly, the department doesn't like a law, it's still a law. Now, what fascinates me when I talk to politicians and public servants about these things is often public servants will tell me they go read the second reading speech to get a sense of what the point of the bill is. So, well, what if the bill came from someone that wasn't your boss? And in Australian political culture, that couldn't happen, except it does. So, yeah, I think private members' bills are important for lots of reasons, but one is to remind people of the primacy of the parliament. It's not ministers or departmental secretaries that write ledge. It's the parliament.
So, Sophie, the Ending Jobs for Mates bill is about a facet of a broader problem, the question of integrity and trust in government. Your independent colleagues, Ali Stegel, is pursuing truth and political advertising laws, Monique Ryan, lobbying regulations, Kate Cheney, a fairer electoral system. Why has integrity been such fertile ground for crossbenchers?
I think particularly before the 22 election, I think we'd hit an all-time low, particularly around jobs for mates, that type of thing. But I think basically people have had a gutful, and we can see around the world that we have many democracies in decline. I think in the US, they're being found to be on the cusp of autocracy. So people are really concerned about what's happening in our democracies, and they know corruption when they see it. There were lots of different types of. The other thing that was happening, and this is another thing that Helen Haynes is pushing on as well, is the pork barrelling. There were so many different, scandals when it came to that pork barrelling, the sports rorts, the car park rorts. I mean, people were just wondering what on earth was going on. Like, how can this be happening? How can it be so obviously corrupt? And there's really not much we can do about it. How is this happening? So I think it hit an all-time low. And, one of the most important things we can do is to strengthen our political system, strengthen our democracy, and then you get much better decisions flowing from a strong democracy, and making sure our institutions are truly independent. That's how you get good support and good policy coming from it.
And another question for you. Last week, the Albanese government pulled its Freedom of Information bill. You were a critic of the bill,
Yay.
As were we. What explains the government backing down on the bill, and does this create a space for positive reform in the area?
I hope so. Well, I have to do a big shout out to the former Commissioner for Public Service, Andrew Podger, who's here in the audience, who's right on top of this issue. But so bodies like the Australia Institute Centre for Public Integrity, everyone knew that these freedom of information changes just did not really pass the pub test. So it was quite bizarre, actually. I have to say, Anthony Albanese came back from the UK, where he had said he was the defender of democracy. He was the defender, he was there defending democracy with Keir Starmer. They were the two guys that were going to defend it. And then came back and then introduced this freedom of information bill that would just undermine our democracy. Freedom of information is one of the core pillars, again, of our democracy. But as Andrew Podgers said, there were elements in those amendments to the freedom of information that would have made it almost impossible to get any document if they didn't want to give it under freedom of information. We rely on freedom of information for almost anything, just for public knowledge, but also investigative journalism, all sorts of things. We need to know what's happening in those documents, for a democratic reason. So to have those changes, which seemed really cynical and really alarming, and so how did it get pulled? It gets pulled when there's a lot of negative commentary and really showing up. And again, having a broader crossbench is really, really important, because you are able to speak up. We've got something that benefits the two major parties. Then you need a crossbench that's going to speak out on these things and speak out truthfully and go to the media on these things. And actually, the government does not like getting negative media. And so there was a lot of negative media on that. We went out hard on each of us. And when it came down to it, actually, I should say the number of amendments, it was a terrible bill. We tried to do a whole lot of amendments on it. I think that was the day that there had been the most amendments introduced in the House since 1930 something. Every single one of them came from the crossbench, and mainly the independents. And it was about this freedom of information. So we are working hard. The other thing I do want to give the crossbench another plug as well, because there was recent study done, or a bit of research done, on how MPs and senators are spending their time inside Parliament. And they looked at everything from bad behaviour through to spending time on policy. So I've got to give us a shout out. You can imagine who was spending all their time on policy, and it was the crossbench, either bringing fresh ideas or making sure we're doing amendments in the House, really working on what we're supposed to be working on, not just grandstanding, not just bad behaviour. We were actually working on policy. So, it's a good finding.
I should say, to their credit, the Liberals and Nationals did, at crunch time, oppose it, and they had been critical of it before. Richard, do you have a sense of what the government was trying to achieve here?
Well, I think built in, unfortunately, to the Australian political culture now is the idea that secrecy and security are the same thing, and that the more we lock information away, the safer we are. Now, there's no evidence to suggest this is a good idea, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest it's a bad idea, because secrecy leads to mistrust. And our public are clearly losing trust in politics. Bill, you might want to talk about some of the polling that we've done, but in Australia and around the world, people are losing faith in democracy. And they've got 30% of young people saying they don't necessarily think democracy is the best way to run a country. Secrecy is not helping. So, but in Australia, we have a very uniquely, I would argue, secretive democratic culture. A quick example, well, a long time ago now, Kevin Rudd was Prime Minister. I put in an FOI for a document that I already had. Right? It's one of the reasons FOI is good, right? As luck would have it, I had an interesting document. I wasn't supposed to have it. So I put in an FOI request, and after 6 months, the department assured me that no such document existed, which was a real pity because I had it. So then I put in an FOI for all documents relating to my FOI request. I still got them, 4 ring binders. Because hard to argue any of it was cabinet in confidence, hard to argue any of it was top secret national security. 4 ring binders full of emails between the departmental secretary, 2 departmental deputy secretaries, their poor FOI officer, and their internal legal team. And it was 4 ring binders full of wasted taxpayers' money stopping them giving me a document that I had and that the law said I was entitled to. So it doesn't surprise me at all that this government or the previous government and this whole crop of senior public servants would want to actually tighten up access to information. Because when you ask the right questions, you embarrass them. And the one thing power hates to be is embarrassed. So sadly, their determination to lock away their own shame, their determination to lock away their own embarrassment, which is different from corruption. Right? It's not as bad as corruption, but their determination to keep their bad ideas, their bad practice, their bad experience secret, rather than admitting people fuck things up and that we need to move on, by keeping all of it secret and pretending they're gaslighting us. Everything's fine, we had an independent review. Can we read it? No. No, but think about the corrosive effect that has on our democracy. So why did they do it? It's instinct. Like the idea that the less we know about what they do, the better their decisions will be, is ridiculous. Sorry, I'm raving on. One last quick observation. I used to teach a course at Australian-New Zealand School of Government. Hint the name, there were New Zealanders there. I had to tell them to shut up at the beginning of the class. And I'd ask senior Australian public servants to explain why we had to lock documents away for 20 years. Oh, frank and fearless, secret, frank, fearless and secret. On they'd go. And then finally I'd say to the New Zealanders, how long are your documents, your cabinet documents, kept secret? Oh, 2 weeks. Seriously, this is all the way across the ditch. 2 weeks. Oh, so you don't give frank advice? Yes, we do. No, we've just had 15 minutes of lecturing from the Australians on how you couldn't be giving frank advice because it'll be public soon. So you guys must give crap advice. No, we think we give good advice because if we give crap advice, everyone will know within weeks. And if the cabinet document cherry picks the data, if the cabinet document clearly misleads the cabinet about the relative sizes of different effects and consequences, anyone that's interested will know. And me, as a senior public servant, it is me who will carry the embarrassment. So other countries think the exact opposite of us. Maybe we're right. Or maybe we're kidding ourselves. Very quickly, often you'll find out things about the Australian Defence Force from US sources because their Congressional Budget Office, their Senate committees tell us all sorts of things that we've been told are top secret. So we are uniquely secretive in Australia. Not you, but the person sitting next to you.
And to give a couple of examples of FOI requests, after the government announced these changes, we put in a couple of FOI requests of our own. One was to the minister who'd claimed that AI bots were generating their own FOI requests, that criminal gangs and foreign agents could be using the FOI system. There's already strict exemptions for national security, so it's unclear what benefit this would serve. We put in an FOI request and very promptly got back, there are no documents that match your search. And this is the one area where at least a no answer is as good as getting something back, because it confirmed that the government had no evidence on which it was making its claims. But that wasn't the minister responsible for the legislation. We put in a very similar request to the Attorney General's Department and waited 150 days to get something back. The bill was very nearly dead by the time we got any information about the evidence base for it. And that was despite, after the 30-day timeline was up, the OAIC, the regulator, denied them an extension. They were meant to hand over the documents after 30 days. It took another 120 days after that.
Is the average for a freedom of information application at the moment over 15 months? Have I got that right?
Some vast number in the months.
Yeah. So it kind of loses its power when you've had to wait that long.
Yeah. And it's designed to, and it's, they make it unnecessarily expensive. They make it unnecessarily tedious. I mean, Rex Patrick's not here tonight. We work a lot with Rex. Rex has a lot of skill and knowledge, but actually what he goes into, and when Bill and others at the Institute put in FOI, you have to start with enormous amounts of resolve. Not, there's a law that says I'm entitled to a document, a dutiful public servant will be following the law sometime soon, said no one putting in an FOI request ever, you have to go into it thinking these bastards are going to drag me around the park for months. This is going to be excruciating. Every step is going to be contested at your expense. Just to be clear, costing a fortune. Bill, I want to chuck a quick question to you. The government said that apart from the gangs, what else? Gangs, crime syndicates and bots, amongst other absurd claims of the government, is there's a flood of FOI requests at the moment. According to facts, is that true?
No, it's not. We've got this great graph from a colleague, Sky Pritovic, who's mapped it out, and there's 40-something thousand FOI requests in the last year, which is just slightly higher than 20 years ago. And in the intervening years, there's been other times where it's hit that point. Over that time, population growth, it means we're actually getting fewer FOI requests. And they've found ways to divert them too, because a lot are about personal information, particular to the applicant. They can resolve them outside the FOI system. So 1 million plus hours of public servant time are spent on these requests. It's costing $80 million at the last year we looked at, but for worse service. It's not as if they're overwhelmed by FOI requests.
But they're overwhelmed by how long it now takes them to process one. That's the irony. There is no increase in FOIs. There's an increase in how long it takes them to not give us the information the law entitles us to. It's clearly unproductive. So, sorry, Bill, I've stolen your question.
No, all good.
Asking Rob.
And less successful FOI applications than ever before.
Sophie, you mentioned kind of leading up to 2022, particular integrity scandals that galvanised the electorate. I'm wondering if we take a step back and kind of look at Australian politics, is it that integrity has gotten worse, or do we put a higher premium on government accountability than we used to? And therefore people are more upset when there are breaches.
Look, I don't know. Richard might be able to answer this one better, but I don't know if it's got worse or not because I'm relatively new to the whole political game. But there are, I think, actually, again, coming into Parliament as somebody who wasn't deeply involved in politics or the political system before is good because you have a certain expectation of the way things should be, what's fair and what's the way it should be done. And so I think that's a good way. It's good to have a lot of people who've been outside the political system because you don't take it for granted that that's just the way it's always been. So there are expectations on the way people should behave, on the integrity of the process. I think that's all there. So a larger crossbench. I just think that there's more capacity for us to interrogate these issues with integrity. But it's also, I've got to just mention the other one, the truth in political advertising. That is a big issue at the moment because of, the booming social media, and also now we have AI and, the whole misinformation that can come out through social media and other platforms. So that is a huge issue. So we do need to be working on truth in political advertising. And there's a couple of examples from the former MP who was in my electorate. There was in the last election, there was a group that was created called Australians for Prosperity. And it was presented as a grassroots organisation of, everyday Australians who were worried about the prosperity of Australia. It was headed up by former Liberal Party people. It was headed up by Jason Falinski, who was, the MP in my electorate. And then it was found out when finally the donations were revealed that it was almost entirely funded by the coal lobby, and it was entirely focused at getting the teals out because they were against, were for the transition to clean energy. So that is utterly misleading. Those types of things, that was just one body. There were multiples of these types of bodies. So I think that's another thing. You misleading the public in this way, I mean, it just shouldn't be allowed to happen. There should be a level of integrity when it comes to those types of things. So I do absolutely think we need, if we want to be able to trust what's happening going forward, we need to have truth in political advertising laws as well. And that's another thing that has been going in South Australia for how long now? 20 years?
40.
And here in the ACT, and working and functioning. Why don't we have it nationally?
So we have one more question from me and then throw it to the audience. So please, you're welcome to start queuing up to ask your questions. Last week, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese leaked the Liberal Party's review into the last federal election. It painted an unhappy picture of the Liberal Party in contrast to what it called teal independents, who spoke a great deal about kindness. Your own seat of Mackellar, I mean, as you mentioned with Jason Falinski, was a Liberal blue ribbon since it was created in 1949 until you won it in 2022. Are there things the Liberals could learn from the community independent movement?
100%, yes. Yes, 100%. And actually, it's funny because they're paying lip service to a lot of things that we do. So they're paying lip service to listening to the community and being able to speak on behalf of the community. But in actual fact, if you're involved in a party, then it's very hard to speak up. But yeah, I actually do think, and so this is just a personal reflection, is that in my first speech, I said that listening is, the superpower of community independence. And I was a GP. And so one thing that we really have to do when you're a GP is to listen. And they say as a doctor that 90% of the diagnosis comes from listening, just from taking the history. So I think it's really, really important that we are absolutely engaging in a genuine way with our communities, with our electorates, and listening to people, trying to bring people back into their democracies. I think before 22, people felt just shut out, and that's what we heard over and listen to anyway. So it is about revitalising our democracy by trying to invite people back in and absolutely listening.
Did you want to add anything?
Oh, just that I think there's so many things that Liberals could learn from people who win elections, but they keep not. No, this is really important. Like, if they want to not learn lessons from people who beat them, well, they'll keep losing. That sounds like a them problem. But one thing I'd add to what Sophie said is that if you go back only 5 years in Australia, the idea that something like Mackellar was a safe seat, and therefore that the voters in a safe seat couldn't be heard, to say it was common in Australia is an understatement that's hard to express. Like, pretty much the whole political class, the whole media class, thought there was a thing called a safe seat. And if you lived in one, who cares? And we all just knew that there was 15 or 20 marginal seats, and they were probably not where you live, so therefore shut up, democracy's happening over there. And I think that still the Australian media and the Labor and Liberal parties are still struggling to get their head around the reality that there is now literally no such thing as a safe seat. I mean, anyone here live in the seat of Bean? Yeah, right. Used to have a double-digit margin. Now it's less than 1,000 votes. All right, and these are the safest Labor seats in the country. So I think the listening is a big part of it. I don't doubt for a minute that people didn't feel heard in those seats. But still the major parties are struggling to kind of hear some of that, because the media and the major parties still kind of think, no, that seat can't be lost. This is the one that's in play. I can ignore that group of voters. And I think that these days that's an incredibly risky thing to do. And lucky for a lot of us, the Liberals keep taking that risk.
And I think they're missing two big things, and that is they don't know who they represent, and they don't know what they stand for. And they're two really big issues. So I don't know. They've got a lot of work to do.
All right. Well, thank you. We've heard the importance of listening, so please come up and get ready to ask your questions. Thank you.
My name's Roy Harvey. You mentioned how badly the AAT was stacked, and yet it consistently found in favour of robo-debt people who brought their cases through. And as Dennis said, they also supported many claims by refugees. Is there any mechanism in your bill that would actually get them to say, is there anything systematic that we see in departmental decision-making that should be addressed? Because when you look at the number of robo-debt findings, but the department never appealed them, and so it never became public. But it seems to me that there was just this trove of evidence that the department was systematically doing something wrong. So anyway, would that fit in the bill, some sort of reporting requirement for some of these government bodies that, like the AAT? I'm not sure, there may be other groups that also deal with appeals.
Thank you for the question. Not specifically in my bill, I should say, because it really is just about the appointments process. And actually, Richard and Bill, you probably can go deeper on this issue as well. But I think you're absolutely right. There were multiple times when it was found that the robo-debt fund, that it was, what was happening was, it shouldn't have been happening. But there wasn't that putting all these cases together so that it was seen to be a systemic problem. And that was the failing. There were individual cases that were found to be the wrong fine, but then it wasn't put together. I might get.
Oh, look, I agree. I think it's a tough one. I don't know that the Sophie's private members bill is the place to fix it. But what your point about the AAT, what it was showing was that the department was systematically incorrectly interpreting the law and ruining people's lives through their incorrect interpretation of the law. And even though they kept losing at the AAT, they didn't change the way they were interpreting the law. So if only 5 or 10% of people were appealing, the 95% that thought, oh, I'm stuffed, and did nothing about it, got no redress. So, you're right, it was a clear early warning system that the system should have incorporated if the system was well designed and well functioning. But given that this is hard for people to hear, given that the point of robo-debt was to be brutal, why would they respond to evidence saying it's brutal? Like, the brutality, the cruelty was the point. That's why we used to send refugees, and still do. That's why we invented the idea of sending refugees overseas, to be brutal. That's why we invented robo-debt, to be brutal. So yes, the AAT was picking up some of that brutality, but that was a tick of approval from the people who invented it.
Apologise, I got here rather late, but I wanted to say that one of the things the Labor government did was it reduced the budget for members of Parliament to run their offices, which meant a dramatic reduction in the ability for the people of Australia to democratically raise their issues and have them dealt with by their members of Parliament. Could you comment on that and how relevant that is to you and what can be done about it? Thanks.
Great question. And yes, so even the number of staff that we had as independent MPs was cut from personal staff, that is, so people helping with the policy aspects, and was cut from 4 to 1. That makes it hard. It makes it a lot harder to do your job, and just means that everyone in the team is stressed probably all the time. So that was one way to very early on in the piece clip our wings. And it comes down to how can we represent our communities? And that's what it does basically. We do have the electorate office staff is separate, and not separate, we obviously all work together, but there were 4 people, full-time equivalents that were in the electorate office. That has actually been increased for everyone across every MP and in the country to 5, but mainly because the populations that we represent have grown. So you've only got 5 people representing 150,000 people or more on all the federal issues. So it's a busy office, and we are, as independents, trying to get across not only presenting fresh ideas that we feel need to be presented, but also responding to all the government's agenda and legislation as well. So it is a massive job. And so curtailing the number of personal advisors was a huge issue for us. And I should say as well, that sort of leads us on to also the next issue, which is the changes in the donation laws, which basically create a stacked playing field against independents getting up. It makes it far harder for an independent to get elected when, if there is a swing seat or a seat that they think that they might try to win, they've got a bucket of up to $90 million that they can use, which is a huge amount which an independent doesn't have access to. So, you know, the major parties, again, may not agree on much, but they agreed on that one, that the independents are kind of annoying and maybe they don't really want them in the future.
I feel like anything could come back to the Freedom of Information Bill because, the Robo-Debt Royal Commission recommended making more documents available. The bill would have made fewer available. And on personal advisors, we heard last week from Senator Andrew Bragg that reportedly Prime Minister Anthony Albanese had offered the Liberals more staff in exchange for backing the FOI bill because unlike the electorate staff, which is applied uniformly, personal staff are a gift of the Prime Minister. So he decides how many his competitors receive. And when the Liberal seat count goes down, he cuts their staff. But when the One Nation seat count goes up, he doesn't give them more staff. So there's an inconsistency even in implementation there.
So again, we need an independent process to basically decide how many staff MPs have so that it doesn't become a political tool.
I just want to repeat what Bill said in case anyone didn't quite get it. The Prime Minister literally has the power to hand out as many taxpayer-funded staff to any party he wants. Literally, it's known as a gift. Once upon a time, I worked for Bob Browne. I was one of those jobs, and I used to call myself John Howard's gift to Bob Browne. Of course, that's literally it. It's a gift, right? Here you go. Have as many as you want. Just get that in your head. These are expensive taxpayer-funded jobs. What Bill just said got reported last week, but I only saw it once in an article about this big. What the Prime Minister said to the Liberal Party is, I will give you a gift in the form of taxpayer-funded staff. I will give you this gift if you will vote to curtail freedom of information laws. Can I make it clearer? He offered a gift, a taxpayer-funded gift. You might think of other words for gift in exchange for the Liberal Party voting to curtail your access to government documents. Was that front page in any newspaper? No. Was it covered in most newspapers? No. Is it scandalous? I think so. The New South Wales Premier stepped down for giving the gift of a bottle of wine, or getting the gift of a bottle of wine, I should say. It's a lot cheaper than a staffer. So that's the country we live in. Just to be clear, look at the mirror, that's Australia. But what's interesting is the Libs didn't want the gift. Now, this is interesting, I think, for the point Sophie was making earlier about, private members' time, how hard it is, government, returns to order, production of documents, all sorts of procedural issues that historically the Liberal Party and the Labor Party have played nice with each other on, because they're, the one thing that most people get wrong about politicians is they're short term. No one gets pre-selected and into Parliament because they can't plan ahead. All right, everyone in Parliament can plan ahead. And oppositions think there's a 50% chance we'll be in government at some point in the next decade. Why would I make my own life hard when I'm in government? So much of the bipartisan consensus around secrecy comes from the fact that they think, when I'm in government, I'd like some secrecy. So think about it. The Prime Minister offered a taxpayer-funded gift to the Liberals, and all the Liberals had to do was further tighten access to information, which the Liberals, when the Liberals are in government, will benefit from one day. But guess what the Liberals thought? I'm not going to be in government one day. Isn't it obvious? Now, this is important, right? Because this is a significant change in the culture of our Parliament. That now that the Liberals are actually focused on accountability in the short term, it's they think, we're going to need FOI to embarrass the government. The odds of us being embarrassed when we're in government, vanishingly small. So I think you'll find there'll be a whole bunch of things that procedurally and administratively, the opposition will be now more likely to vote with the crossbench on. Because these are smart people, these are patient people, these are people who've been in power a long time, And historically, the smarter voices in the room would be, calm down, you get 1 day's worth of press that'll ruin your life when you're a minister. Well, guess what? They're not worried about being any more ministers.
Hi, thanks so much for organising this. I was sort of wondering, going back to your prior discussion about the US and the UK and their sort of chaotic appointment process with RFK Jr. and the Peter Mandelson scandal recently, how much do you see this sort of jobs for mates culture as a problem inherent with sort of two-party or like major party political structures versus other countries that sort of have more like consensual systems with lots of smaller parties? Do you think that sort of the different sizes of the parties connect to how jobs for mates works in different countries?
I think that's a great question. Again, that's an interesting one, isn't it, Peter Mandelson? And I wonder if everyone knows that story. But I think it does. I think when there's two major parties and the power goes between the two, then there's mutual benefit in not causing themselves too many problems. It probably is a greater problem. I have been very focused on Australia and what's happening here, but I do think that there's been a lot more talk, like to your question before, Bill, is this a greater problem now than previously? Probably not. It's just that there are people outside the major parties who are bringing this to the fore. So I think that's a good thought. Do you have a position on that, Bill?
No, I'd be interested to test it. I mean, you could even just look across the ditch at New Zealand and ask if they're generally minority and coalition governments, whether they have a very different appointments process.
As I said before, I mean, it's not my expertise, but the one thing I know is that around the world there's lots of, and farewell to Nicolette Buller, who made the member for Bradfield, who were very happy, won by a handful of votes because there's no such thing as a safe seat. Sorry, I was going to give Nicolette a shout out later, but she ran off in time. So the point is, lots of democracies around the world do it quite differently to us, not just the appointments, but democracy. So, I think we are in this kind of uniquely dangerous combination. We have a two-party system sort of culture, and both parties benefit from that. I think it's fair to say that the coalition push things a lot harder when they're in than Labor. Like Labor appointed, never forget this, one of the worst decisions ever. Labor made Peter Costello the chair of the Future Fund. Would the Liberals ever appoint Wayne Swan? So something in Labor feels that if they kind of hand out some jobs to Liberals, there'll be kind of credit for fair play or something. It's still jobs for mates in some sense. Costello didn't apply for the job and get it. But Labor's kind of willing to kind of hand these olive branches to people in the hope they'll be congratulated for being so wonderfully centrist. Doesn't happen, and then the Libs, Rudd came up with all those ABC appointment rules, and the Libs just get in and go, nah, not doing any of that. And then everyone kind of looks aghast, and then we're still watching a shit ABC today because of it. I think there's lots of lessons to be learnt from overseas, but I do think a two-party system that has a parliamentary constitution, but a culture that really hands a lot of power to the executive is a uniquely dangerous combination.
Well, that brings us to the end. Squeeze in one quick
question.
very short.
So my name is Anna Nerve. I'm from University of Canberra. I work for the New South Wales Education Department. I work at different schools, public school, Catholic school, Anglican school, so many schools. So my question is that in order to end job for maid, is there any way that we have a project to promote a social cohesion? Because at the moment, the left doesn't hate the right and the conservative doesn't like the progressive. So like I watched the program at England, they had a program that the student from the rich school, they go to the public school and they write an essay in comparison. I wonder if Australian Institute, and thank you all for promote the democracy and history. And I just want, if in the future, if you have any plan to promote a social cohesion project, like the student from the girl only go to the men to write the different perspective to exchange to promote cohesion. If you have such a project, like that in the future, I'm willing to donate big for the Australian Institute next year as well. Thank you.
I think we just got bribed with a donation. Sophie's going to have us arrested. Look, let me just quickly take that question. I don't know if Sophie's got something to say about it, but look, once upon a time, I went to this thing called a social cohesion engine, which brought people together from all walks of life. It was called a public school. Yeah, thanks. Australia now has one of the most privatised school systems in the world. And the design of our school system puts boys and girls here, it puts Catholics and Protestants here, it puts Jewish people and Muslim people here. I mean, we are subsidising the creation of the opposite of social cohesion, and then going, oh, wonder what went wrong there. So, it's taken decades to stuff it up this bad. I don't disagree that those kind of excursions from rich kids to poor schools would be handy, but I wish they weren't excursions. I wish we were like Norway, where rich kids and poor kids just kind of went to school together. But, that's naive, just to be clear, in Australia. That's naive to suggest that we might kind of ever turn that back. But, I'm not opposed to your ideas, but I think there's a structural solution that we've really bollocksed up, which is we're now letting schools stratify our kids according to their parents' ethnicity, their parents' religion, and their parents' income, while wondering why we're becoming less cohesive. But to end on a positive note, 75% of Australians think we should slap a tax on export gas. Round of applause. The voting bloc that supports it most is One Nation. Do not say it's ironic. Stop it. No, I mean it. This is what's messing with your heads. The idea that left, this thing called left, and this thing called right are always going to fight each other. Well, One Nation voters and Green voters both think we should tax the bejesus out of the gas industry. No, they do. And they think that we need protections for freedom of speech. They both think we need truth in political advertising. Like, there are so many things that unite left and right, that the major parties don't want to talk about. One of the reasons that our politics is fracturing is the determination of the once major parties to not address a whole bunch of issues that are important to broad cross-sections of the community. And I think our democracy would be in much better shape if our parliament did the sort of things that private members' bills are trying to get our parliament to do, to remind voters that our parliament can actually fix problems. But when you've got something as popular and as easy as taxing gas exports that both major parties are determined not to do, no wonder people lose faith, not just in parties, but in democracy. So I like your idea. I don't mean to criticise your idea. I just want to remind everyone that we've spent decades pulling kids apart, and maybe the simple solution is to put them back together.
I just wanted to add to that. In Wales, just over 10 years ago, they did a national conversation to find out what was their vision for Wales, for their country, the Wales we want. And we don't have a vision for Australia. We've got, where are we heading? We don't actually have a vision. So one thing that work is being done on is this Wellbeing of Future Generations bill, which is another bill, private members bill I introduced. And it would be based on having a national conversation about where we actually want, the direction we want our nation to head. And I actually think that would bring a lot of people together because, as Richard just said, actually, we have a whole lot in common in many, many ways that we wouldn't realise. But having that shared goal, that shared vision, the shared objectives, I think would do a lot to bring, Australians together.
Thank you, Sophie and Richard. And please thank Sophie and Richard for their time this evening. And can you keep it going to thank Verity Lane Market for hosting us. And I'd also like to thank the Australia Institute staff who made this possible. Anna and Eleanor, and I know there are others. Now, I mentioned A Time for Bravery, What Happens When Australia Chooses Courage, available at the back of the room for purchase, and Sophie will be around for a book signing after this. Thank you again for attending tonight's event, and I look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you, Bill.